The Mighty Carson Art Players version of The Ed Sullivan Show.
Welcome to our show, ladies and gentlemen. Before we get on with the show, I'd like to mention that I'll be out in Butte, Montana County Fair.
Famous person Ed Sullivan founded The Ed Sullivan Show, an innovative venue that increased the visibility and success of innumerable bands and performers, particularly in the rock and roll genre. Respectful and family-friendly content was Ed's first priority, and he never wavered from his no-nonsense approach. But behind the scenes, he had an unspoken animosity against one particular singer. Are Ed's intense feelings provoked by this singer's unconventional performance style? Travel with us as we uncover the truth. Jim Morrison was so unbearable that Ed Sullivan made no secret of his dislike for him. The Doors were invited to perform on The Ed Sullivan Show on September 17, 1967. They were a rising rock band known for their rebellious spirit and crazy sound. Since the event was aired nationwide and was famous for launching music careers, this wasn't only a performance, it was a huge break. Under Jim Morrison's erratic leadership, the Doors were already making waves in the music industry. The band's first album was selling like hotcakes, and the lead song, Light My Fire, was going viral. However, tensions swiftly rose behind the scenes. A high-ranking CBS executive made it plain during band practice that they couldn't use the line, "Girl, we couldn't get much higher" in Light My Fire. The reason behind this directive was that the word higher could be interpreted as a drug reference, which neither the network nor Ed Sullivan wanted linked to the show. Morrison slyly planned to ignore the request, despite the band's nod of consent. The live performance followed. Jim Morrison confidently took the microphone under the glare of the studio lights and sung the original words in front of 1 million people. It was an intentional act of rebellion. He was determined to sing the song how he saw fit, without apology or consideration. The behavior went beyond crossing a boundary. It infuriated Ed Sullivan, who took it personally right away. Even if the band continued performing without any further problems, the harm had already been done. Ed Sullivan, who was famously serious and had a reputation for strict standards, made no effort to conceal his anger. He avoided any physical contact with the band, including shaking hands, thanking them, smiling, and even seeing Jim Morrison in the face. It was very evident at that moment. Ed Sullivan despised him, and it didn't matter to him who knew it. 6 other appearances by the Doors on The Ed Sullivan Show were in the works. We promptly terminated the offers. In an unusual move, Ed Sullivan permanently banned the band after being very outraged by Morrison's behavior. Although Sullivan has welcomed many famous people previously, Jim Morrison caused an emotional reaction that Sullivan would never recover from. The event's news quickly went viral. Some viewed Morrison's refusal to comply with TV restrictions as a noble act. Some others thought it was rude and haughty. The media, however, wasted no time focusing on Ed Sullivan's reaction. The concert itself became renowned, but his cold attitude of Morrison was much more so. After then, the Doors fully committed to their rebellious persona. Live performances became increasingly raucous, as did Morrison's antics. Their admirers adored them despite the fact that some panned them for it. Their legendary status among young people seeking authenticity was further enhanced by Ed Sullivan's decision to ban them. The Doors didn't require the career-boosting force of The Ed Sullivan Show. Their star continued to rise. Jim Morrison, who was fiery, courageous, and unfiltered, was the one who ultimately suffered for singing his heart's desire. Even though Ed Sullivan's distaste for Morrison was clear, it ultimately served to further establish the singer's status as a rock legend. Was Jim Morrison the only singer whom Ed Sullivan really despised? And what triggered his extreme reaction? Keep watching to find out. The Elvis Presley scandal that rocked television. Ed Sullivan's inability to stand Elvis. It is commonly known that during Elvis Presley's performances on The Ed Sullivan Show, he and Ed Sullivan had a famous argument. Disagreement arose between them because of fundamental differences in worldview, character quirks, and lifestyle choices. Ed Sullivan was an old-fashioned guy who aimed to make his show family-friendly by avoiding profanity and other inappropriate content. Contrarily, Elvis Presley was an innovative and fearless performer whose explosive dancing routines and strong musical style were surprising and defiant in his day. Because of his concerns that Elvis's dancing style may offend more conservative older viewers, Sullivan initially rejected Elvis's request to perform on his show. In the end, though, Sullivan consented to have Elvis sing because he saw how famous he was and how much younger fans loved him. Not much went swimmingly when Elvis and Sullivan appeared on the same program. Elvis had an extroverted and fun demeanor, which made Sullivan, who was composed and serious, feel awkward and uneasy. Because of the rigid structure and restrictions of Sullivan's program, Elvis, who was accustomed to being exuberant and uninhibited when performing, likely felt constrained. The host, Ed Sullivan, had a history of contentious situations. Despite his notoriety for quarreling with Elvis over his hip-shaking and the Doors over their use of bad language, he knew how important it was to adapt to changing tastes and keep his younger audience engaged. Because of this, Sullivan found himself in a difficult position. He wanted to appeal to a wide age range of viewers and TV executives without alienating the younger demographic that was captivated by thrilling acts like the Rolling Stones. Elvis Presley became the focus of everyone's attention the moment he appeared. American culture was rocked by his electrifying stage appearance, which included a variety of musical styles and, most notably, his hip motions. Many were taken aback by Elvis's performances. They saw him as challenging conventional values and a negative role model for youth. The invitation to play on The Ed Sullivan Show in 1956 marked a watershed moment in his career. An unprecedented 60 million viewers tuned in to see Elvis's debut performance on the show. It catapulted him to even greater fame. An iconic event in television history was undoubtedly his third and last appearance. During his performance of Hound Dog and other popular songs on January 6, 1957, Presley started swaying his hips inappropriately and suggestively while singing. By the time the TV team rushed to focus on Elvis's face in an effort to conceal his movements, it was already too late. People at home were either amazed or ecstatic by what they witnessed, while the studio crowd let out wild screams and cheers. People all around the country had strong feelings about Elvis's performance. Some loved his enthusiasm and charm, while others thought his dancing was obscene and disgusting. Because Elvis didn't play by the rules, Ed Sullivan, who had strong opinions about what was appropriate on television, was enraged. He was very set on never having Elvis back on his show. However, it's ironic since Elvis's fame skyrocketed due to the issue. He became a cultural icon for daring to defy authority and societal norms, and he became a symbol of defiance. Performing on The Ed Sullivan Show was a watershed moment in Elvis Presley's life, but it was also a watershed moment in television and music history. The door was thrown wide for subsequent artists to freely express themselves and transform American pop culture as he pushed the boundaries of what could be seen on TV. The ruckus that ensued from his energetic rendition of Hound Dog in the 1950s highlighted the generational divide in the United States. Elvis was idolized by teenagers for his daring rebellion and admiration by adults for his immorality. The larger cultural transformations that would surface in the 1960s, when America confronted difficult concerns regarding gender, racism, and social change, were mirrored in the debate over Elvis's dance. Despite their disagreements, Elvis's appearances on The Ed Sullivan Show were essential in elevating him to the status of one of the most iconic figures in American music and in extending his recognition across the country. Did Ed Sullivan actually boost the careers of any artists or bands, even if he wasn't always kind to all of them? Find out by continuing to watch. The Beatles broke the ratings record with their debut television performance on February 9, 1964, to an audience of 73 million people in the United States. The Ed Sullivan Show included 3 pre-recorded performances, the first of which was this. It would appear to be no more than any other period in history at first look. Looking at it through a cultural perspective, though, it ranks up there with the electrifying Bob Dylan, Elvis Presley's Return Spectacular, Woodstock, the birth of MTV, and Live Aid as one of the most influential events of the 20th century. The Beatles' fame is like the tides. It goes up and down. With the help of a re-release, documentary, or homage, artists from every generation occasionally find new audiences for their work. Beatlemania, heightened by their Ed Sullivan debut, is unparalleled, even if the Fab Four weren't the first or last teenage heartthrobs to win over youthful audiences. Rhythm and blues and early rock and roll singers from the United States, such as Buddy Holly and Eddie Cochran, who were frequently more famous in the United Kingdom than in their native country, had an early influence on John, Paul, George, and Ringo. The Beatles were already internationally famous by 1963, but to conquer America was their greatest ambition. Although no other British band had ever achieved such widespread success in the United States prior to the Beatles, no other band had ever been quite like them. The Beatles' manager, Brian Epstein's buddy and European talent scout Peter Pritchard, proposed the idea of having the band perform on The Ed Sullivan Show. The creators of the program weren't too enthusiastic at first. They weren't sure that 4 mop-haired young lads from Liverpool would pique the interest of American listeners. That all changed in October 1963, though, when a cast member saw a huge gathering of admirers waiting for the band's return from tour at Heathrow Airport. Ed Sullivan was the one who was addressed. Sullivan agreed to have them on his February program in New York after witnessing that craze. In the months that followed, American radio stations started playing the Beatles' music, and their infectious, energetic pop-rock style immediately won over millions of listeners. Their debut American hit, I Want to Hold Your Hand, reached the top of the charts in January 1964. John F. Kennedy International Airport, which was renamed on February 7th, was greeted by throngs of yelling fans when the band touched down on February 7th. Over 50,000 people requested tickets to the concert before recording began at Manhattan's Studio 50. Unfortunately, 728 individuals could not fit in the theater. I Want to Hold Your Hand, All My Loving, Till There Was You, I Saw Her Standing There, and The Beatles were the musical highlights of the evening, and they marked the formal arrival of British music in America. The Zombies, Animals, Kinks, Who, and Rolling Stones were among the bands that quickly followed in the Beatles' footsteps. The doors that the Beatles had opened were now completely wide open and would never be closed again. The Beatles, John, Paul, George, and Ringo, had accomplished the seemingly impossible. They were welcomed back into the nation that had first inspired their music. The Fab Four occupied the top 5 positions on the Billboard Hot 100 list for a full 2 months afterwards. Albums by the Beatles accounted for 60% of all music sold in the U.S. during the first quarter of 1964. An old friend of the band, the British record producer Peter Asher, made the remark, "It's one of the all-time great tricks at their rise to popularity. We ripped off your songs, gave them our own spin, and then sold them back to you." When the Beatles appeared on The Ed Sullivan Show, it was seen by music historians as the beginning of a cultural revolution, not only the British invasion. A rising counterculture movement, which questioned established conventions, was sparked by it. Although the band members were in their early 20s, the majority of their followers were much younger, female, passionate, and very vocal. For this reason, there were those who wrote them off as little more than a passing fad among teenagers, on par with Ricky Nelson or Elvis Presley. On a more fundamental level, too, a generational gap was widening. The elder generation finally felt the baby boomers' arrival, prepared to challenge the status quo and demand reform at that very time. Protests against the war and the struggle for civil rights were both fueled by that defiant attitude, which would come to characterize 1960s society. Even musicians of the future would never forget that night's performance. Gene Simmons, Nancy Wilson, Tom Petty, Mark Mothersbaugh, and Billy Joel are just a few of the artists from other genres who have expressed their desire to become musicians after watching the Beatles on The Ed Sullivan Show. From Outkast to Boy Genius, musicians have paid tribute, reproduced, and mocked the performance. Changing times are possible. Our preferences in music might change throughout time. The world keeps coming back to the Beatles, though. Let's go into the unique qualities and significance of The Ed Sullivan Show. American television viewers enjoyed the variety show The Ed Sullivan Show from its debut on CBS on June 20, 1948, until its cancellation on March 28, 1971. New York City's famous entertainment journalist Ed Sullivan hosted the show, which went on to become an iconic element of American popular culture. The CBS Sunday night movie took its place in September 1971, the same year it terminated. No, 15 on TV Guide's 50 Greatest TV Shows of All Time list was The Ed Sullivan Show in 2002. Number 31 on TV Guide magazine's 60 Best Series of All Time list was The Ed Sullivan Show in 2013. Every Sunday night from 8 to 9 p.m., CBS aired the show from 1948 until it was canceled in 1971. The time zone is Eastern Time. Although it ran from 9 to 10 p.m. during its debut season, the show went on to become one of the few programs to stay in the same time slot on the same network for more than 20 years. E.T. Ballet dancers, dramatic actors delivering monologues, comedians, classical musicians, opera singers, popular recording artists, songwriters, and even circus acts were all part of the spectacular variety of performers on the show. Even though conventional vaudeville had virtually died out by this point, Sullivan nevertheless used a number of artists from that era in his shows. Toast of the Town was the initial name of the show that Marlo Lewis helped design and produce. A lot of people started calling it The Ed Sullivan Show before the formal rebranding on September 25, 1955, even though it was the actual name. Comedy duo Dean Martin and Jerry Lewis, singer Monica Lewis, and the legendary Broadway songwriting duo Richard Rodgers and Oscar Hammerstein II were all part of the cast for the June 20, 1948 premiere episode. The duo performed songs from their upcoming musical South Pacific, which premiered on Broadway in 1949. The event was primarily sponsored by the Lincoln Mercury division of Ford Motor Company from 1948 to 1962. During this time, Ed Sullivan would frequently run live commercials for Mercury Autos. The show originally aired live from the Maxine Elliott Theater, which is also known as CBS TV Studio 51, on Broadway and 39th Street in New York City. In subsequent years, it became CBS TV Studio 50, located at 1697 Broadway on 53rd Street, its permanent home. To celebrate the 20th anniversary of the program, the Ed Sullivan Theater was renamed in June 1968. Mel and Joanna Simon, Danny Davis, and the Nashville Brass, Sandler and Young, and Danny Davis were guests on the last original episode, 1068, that aired on March 28, 1971. This show was axed along with a slew of others that summer because they failed to connect with the younger demographic that marketers were trying to reach. Prior to the new primetime access rules implementation in the fall, there was a dramatic change in television programming. Reruns aired until June 6, 1971, even though fresh episodes concluded in March. Ed Sullivan showcased both new talent every week and long-running characters that made many appearances over the show's run. Topo Gigio, an endearing Italian puppet mouse who made his debut on December 9, 1962, was a favorite among fans. On December 31, 1950, the show welcomed the brilliant ventriloquist Senor Vences, who was a regular on the show. Special episodes were broadcast live from other places, including Japan, Australia, and the UK, in addition to the majority of the programs that aired live from New York City. The Ed Sullivan Show was a staple of American television for a long time, and it frequently introduced viewers to foreign artists for the first time. In a special interview issued by the Newspaper Enterprise Association to commemorate the show's 10th anniversary in June 1958, Ed Sullivan discussed the show's evolution throughout the years. Who was Ed Sullivan, and what is his true story, considering the profound influence of The Ed Sullivan Show? Find out by continuing to watch. In Harlem, New York City, on September 28, 1901, Sullivan came into this world as the son of Elizabeth F., formerly Smith, and customs official Peter Arthur Sullivan. Tragically, his twin brother Daniel barely made it through a few months of illness. A little red brick house at 53 Washington Street was Sullivan's home while he was growing up in Port Chester, New York. He came from a long line of musicians. His Irish ancestors would get together to jam on the piano, sing, and spin records. Sullivan was a standout athlete at Port Chester High School, where he earned a total of 12 letters. He was a three-sport star, a halfback in football, a guard in basketball, and a sprinter on the track squad. He was instrumental in the baseball team's several championship runs while serving as both catcher and captain. Looking back on his high school years in New York, Sullivan reflected on how racially mixed the sports were. While in Connecticut, he came across teams that had black players, which was very common back then. He came to believe in the inherent value and equality of black athletes as a result of his formative experiences. Sullivan started writing professionally while still a high school student, contributing sports features to the local daily, the Port Chester Daily Item. His full-time employment with the publication began after he graduated. The Hartford Post, where he had relocated in 1919, went out of business the very week he had arrived. Refusing to give up, he joined the New York Evening Mail as a sports reporter. After the publication went out of business in 1923, Sullivan worked for a number of other news organizations, including AP, the Philadelphia Bulletin, the Morning World, the Morning Telegraph, and the Leader. He became the sports editor of the New York Evening Graphic after landing a job as a sports writer there in 1927. After Walter Winchell left the Daily Mirror in 1929, Sullivan became the New York Evening Graphic's Broadway columnist. Not long after that, he departed to become a member of the New York Daily News, the biggest tabloid in New York. At that location, his piece, Little Old New York, chronicled the exciting realm of Broadway performances and rumors. To further increase his fame, Sullivan also went into radio, where he broadcasted news about the entertainment industry. He was both the writer and star of the 1933 film Mr. Broadway, which introduced audiences to famous performers and nightclubs in New York City. Sullivan became one of Walter Winchell's most formidable adversaries and a major player in the entertainment industry very soon after. He set up shop in the El Morocco nightclub, which was close to Winchell's domain at the Stork Club, and used it as an unofficial headquarters. Even though Winchell's fame waned as he transitioned from radio to television, Sullivan continued to write for the New York Daily News. An important step toward reconciliation occurred in the late 1960s, when Sullivan, in an interview with a magazine, openly lauded Winchell's legacy, therefore easing their lengthy animosity. In addition to his work as a journalist, Sullivan was quite involved in the world of show business. He was a master of ceremonies and producer for vaudeville acts in the Roaring Twenties and the Great Depression. On the old WABC station, he oversaw a radio program and also put up benefit concerts to raise money for several charities. From journalism to entertainment, Sullivan's many pursuits helped establish his reputation as a multi-talented personality. Were there other aspects of Ed Sullivan that were unknown to most people beyond his notoriety and achievements? Keep watching to find out. His daughter, Betty, and grandson, Rob, among others, have demonstrated that Ed Sullivan was a far more nuanced and serious individual than the general public tends to see. Betty has discussed her father's notorious anger issues in several interviews. She stated Ed never ever used physical force, but he would become quite upset over little things or when he felt insulted. He was capable of terrifying wrath. When Ed returned home to find a shattered window, it was a glaring illustration of his impulsive nature. He walked outside to face the neighborhood youngsters in an angry state, since he assumed they had broken it. Surprisingly, a wayward ball shattered the window while his own daughter played. It is clear from this anecdote how quickly Ed lost his temper and how frequently he made assumptions without having all the information. Speaking about her private life, Betty said that her father's intense distrust had an impact on her. Ed was concerned that her new young partner may be a communist when they began dating. This prompted Ed to investigate the young man's background and even employ the services of a private investigator to ensure his safety. Even though Ed was mistaken about his concerns, they strained his relationship with Betty and had an impact on their future together. During the 1950s and early 1960s, when many Americans were being closely observed for their political views, Ed Sullivan's dread of communism was prevalent. Ed was known to be reserved and quiet when he wasn't working, despite his fame and popularity on television. His favorite pastime, according to Betty, was spending time alone in his study. Those who knew him primarily as an energetic TV host were astonished by this reserved aspect of his personality. His reserved demeanor extended to his professional life as well. According to several of Ed's co-workers, he was reclusive and did not like small chat. He maintained an air of professionalism around everyone he spoke with, yet he was cold and distant most of the time. Did Ed Sullivan have any family life outside of his work and personal life? In his private life, how did he spend his time? Keep watching to find out. Sybil Bauer, a renowned swimmer who was engaged to Sullivan, died of cancer in 1927 when she was just 23 years old. Sullivan started dating Sylvia Weinstein in 1926. When Sylvia first started seeing Ed Sullivan, she informed her family he was Jewish. Sullivan, though, was Catholic, and her brother quickly learned this. They had a rocky 3 years together since their families were so opposed to them being together because of their religious differences. After much deliberation, they tied the knot in a small ceremony held at City Hall on April 28, 1930. Elizabeth, lovingly called Betty by Sylvia, was born 8 months later. The name was chosen to commemorate Sullivan's mother, who had passed away earlier in the year. Bob Precht, who produced The Ed Sullivan Show, was married to Betty in 1952. After residing at the Hotel Astor in Times Square for an extensive period, the Sullivans had hired a suite of rooms at the Hotel Delmonico by 1944. Prior to the 1971 finale of The Ed Sullivan Show, Sullivan maintained his own office out of a leased apartment that was next to the family's living accommodations. Sullivan would frequently contact his wife by phone after each broadcast to inquire about her impressions of the show. The Sullivans were regulars at some of New York City's most exclusive nightclubs and eateries, including Jimmy Kelly's, Danny's Hideaway, and the Stork Club. A number of popes granted Sullivan audiences over his lifetime, and he was acquainted with celebrities and presidents of the United States. Sylvia Sullivan was her husband's go-to financial expert. A torn aorta was the tragic cause of her death on March 16, 1973, at Mount Sinai Hospital. color broadcasts of CBS's weekly shows started airing in the autumn of 1965. Pacific and Mountain time zones saw a rebroadcast of The Ed Sullivan Show after it had aired live in Central and Eastern time zones. Since then, the official Ed Sullivan Show YouTube channel and home video have both made available selected segments. The show's viewership had plummeted by 1971. Amidst an attempt to reorganize its programming, CBS axed The Ed Sullivan Show in March 1971 and other long-running shows in what became known as the Rural Purge. Sullivan, understandably irritated by the decision, declined to host the last 3 months of episodes that were set to air. Rather, special broadcasts with guest hosts ran until May 1971, and then repeats ran until June of that year. With the final replay, Sullivan officially announced the show's retirement from its legendary Sunday night time slot with a farewell message. His tenure with CBS continued after the program ended, and in June 1973, he presented a special commemorating the network's 25th anniversary. Sullivan received the devastating news that his esophageal cancer had progressed in early September 1974. His family decided not to tell him about the condition, even though doctors gave him a little time to live. Sullivan, who smoked cigarettes throughout his life, chalked up his health problems on a recurrence of stomach ulcers. He died at New York's Lenox Hill Hospital on October 13, 1974. On a chilly and wet day, almost 2,000 people showed up to his burial at St. Patrick's Cathedral. There was a vault in Ferncliff Cemetery in Hartsdale, New York, where Sullivan was laid to rest. Please tell me your thoughts on the vocalist whom Ed Sullivan found intolerable. Had he a valid cause to dislike them? Please share your thoughts in the space provided. We appreciate you taking the time to see this movie and hope you enjoyed it. Leave a like and subscribe if you enjoyed it. To view the next video and read up on your favorite celeb news, click here. Coming right up.